What's up, Steeler fans, and welcome back to another Monday morning conversation. These are tough in the offseason, but I do enjoy having guests on the show, and today I have a very esteemed guest, Tim Benz, a colleague at Fans First Sports Network. So, Tim, welcome back to the show you were on last year. I appreciate you coming back on again.
For sure. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate being called esteemed. It's a lot nicer than what most people call me in my emails and my X feed.
I bet. I can only imagine. I do probably think you might appreciate this because I listen to your podcast, whether it's about the Pirates, Penguins, or the Steelers. You're the one that's always asking the questions. Now you get to answer the questions. So this will be a lot of fun. But before we do that, I want to give you a chance to plug your podcast, what you're doing, what you've got coming up, maybe anything new and exciting. Go ahead and do that now.
Yeah, Breakfast with Benz at TribLive. I've got my own page at the TribLive website. And you can download our podcasts, which are at the Fans First Network. I generally put up 6, 7, 8 podcasts per week. We've got everything from fantasy sports, some high school sports, and, of course, weekly conversations about the Penguins and the Steelers with some of my TribLive colleagues and various guests that we have from around the country that come on with us all the time. So we like to keep that feed pretty well populated. Even if it's in the offseason for the Steelers, we always do draft coverage with my colleague, Matt Williamson, from the Steelers Radio Network, as well as Steelers Nation Radio. He's great come draft time. Always look forward to those. Those are coming up in April. And, of course, as Penguin season kicks into high gear here with more and more eyes on the Pens now that the Steelers are done, we've got 3 or 4 Penguins podcasts that pop up per week. So if people are into the Pens, that's going to be your place for it as well.
If you're a Pittsburgh sports fan like I am, you love Tim's feed because he covers all the major Pittsburgh sports teams. So make sure you check that out. Now, Tim, you were on the show. This was prior to the regular season, I believe, in 2023. And we talked a lot about response, the Steelers' response to adversity. And you said you were really upset that the Steelers never had that adversity. We talked about 2022's finish, 7 of 9, 4 in a row. The pristine preseason, as I call it, where the offense went out and just looked phenomenal and they had no hiccups whatsoever. We got to see that adversity. We got to see it in a big way, in a lot of ways, with both Kenny Pickett and the way that the team is going to orchestrate things with offensive coordinator being fired. Let me go back and ask you that same question. What did you think of the response of the Steelers when they finally faced adversity? Let's start with Pickett first, and then we'll leak our way down to the other avenues.
Well, I thought they ended up where I expected them to be. I predicted that they would be 10-7. I predicted that they would get to the first round of the playoffs as the 6 or 7 seed, and I predicted that they would lose in the first round of the playoffs. So they ended up being exactly what I thought they would be when they got to training camp, when they got out of training camp. I saw that preseason. I bumped my prediction up a game. I thought they'd be 9-8, then I said 10-7, and sure enough, they got there. It was just an extremely circuitous route to how they got there. It was a very strange way to get to where I thought they would be, because when you think of it, and this speaks on a broader tone and a bigger picture to the whole they've never had a losing season under Mike Tomlin thing, but you'd play the entire season to eliminate 16 teams out of 32, right? I mean, 14 teams make the playoffs. And I think it's something like 2/3 of the league finish with 9 wins or more. So, it's not exactly difficult to be 500 in the NFL. That's what the NFL is. That's what the NFL is built for. That's how the NFL wants things to be. So the Steelers are very representative of what the National Football League is striving for. They were just a little bit better than that. And granted, it was under some circumstances that saw a lot of adversity. The quarterback situation brought them adversity. The inside linebacker situation brought them adversity. The safeties brought them adversity. But to talk specifically about Pickett and how things went there, he saw a lot of personal adversity on the field, personally for him is what I mean.
Right.
He saw plenty of that, and I don't think he handled it great. I not much of it he could do about it because of injury. But, when he got put to the bench and was kind of grumbly with the media when they asked him if he had learned anything by watching, he said, no, there's a very easy way to answer that question, and that's not it, obviously. The whole thing about the depth chart, to me, everybody wanted to tamp that down. I think there was something to it. I think there must have been something about his demeanor that made the coaching staff feel like they wouldn't be comfortable if they made him lower on the depth chart. And that to me is a little bit of a red flag. But my hunch is right now, if you maybe guess, they will be going back to Kenny Pickett as their starting quarterback next year. If you maybe bet, I think it's about 60-40 that'll be the case. Whether that's with Mason Rudolph, a drafty first rounder, or your classic Jacoby Brissett journeyman backup quarterback type.
Yeah, Joshua Dobbs put his name out there as well for another return to Pittsburgh. But so let's go back to Pickett and let's talk about him in particular. So you talked about off the field, but really the first time he had adversity on the field was this season, where he wasn't turning the ball over, but he just wasn't able to make the plays. Whether it was, it depends on who you talk to. He wasn't reading the field well enough. It was the offensive coordinator. When you think back on 2023, where do you put the onus? Do you put the onus more on the execution of said plays or the plays themselves? And let's talk about Matt Canada being dismissed in that same realm.
Pretty difficult to differentiate between where the responsibility begins and ends for the quarterback and the offensive coordinator, because, I do think he had a lot pounded into his skull about the best thing possible is to end every possession without a turnover. And if there's points attached to that, it's gravy. I think that was the wrong way of looking at things. And I think that he kind of got the tunnel vision they wanted him to have, which was take care of the ball first and everything else that comes afterwards is a bonus. And that's not the right way to play football in 2023-24. So I don't know exactly how to split that, how to parse out the blame pie, but I do know that, when Mason Rudolph was in there, I saw shots being taken that I constantly heard and saw in cut-ups that were available that Pickett just didn't try. Or when Trubisky was in there, he just had a bad feel as to when to try them and when to not. Rudolph took some of those shots that were calculated and a little bit risky, but not completely pushing the envelope. I don't think Pickett took them at all, basically. And when Trubisky did take them, it was the wrong time. And then there were times where he swallowed the ball and didn't take risks that really bit them. So he was in between, and that's probably why he's going to be without a job next year. Rudolph took the shots that were there. That's probably why he's getting a better job than what he had this year, whether that's in Pittsburgh or somewhere else. And Pickett just didn't take them, but they have a lot invested in him. I think whatever coordinator comes in to run the Steelers next will hopefully be one that they think melds with his skill set, whatever that skill set is. And then they'll just find a capable backup or a guy to challenge him a bit that they could put in mid-season and maybe be a younger version of him, a second, third-round draft choice that could be the guy next year if they decide not to give Pickett the fifth-year option.
Let's stick with the offensive coordinator talk. And let me ask you, because obviously the search is ongoing. Right before we hit record on this, Arthur Smith, former Atlanta Falcons head coach, he is reportedly from Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network coming into Pittsburgh for an interview for the head coaching job. Nonetheless, do you think the Steelers' offensive coordinator job is an attractive job?
No, I don't. I think there are other jobs out there with either a better quarterback in place or a quarterback to be determined where you don't have to try to justify a previous offensive coordinator's thumbs up on a guy, a guy that a previous offensive coordinator was working on that probably will have another year or two invested in them from the franchise. And you're also working under a head coach that likes to be very hands-on, very much out in front, very much an authoritative voice throughout the building, that hasn't had a lot of offensive success for a myriad of reasons for a myriad number of years. I don't think it's a very attractive job. No. And I think you got issues along the offensive line and minimal weapons at wide receiver. So, yeah, I think there are better gigs out there. I mean, I think a classic example of that is we heard well in advance of Zach Robinson's taking the job in Atlanta that the Steelers were interested. That's very easy for him to jump at that position if he wants to, and he didn't.
Didn't even interview. He didn't even get in for an interview, not even a virtual interview.
Like I know that they asked for permission, but to go to what, Atlanta with Raheem Morris? Like that's more attractive.
It's not like Atlanta has. I mean, they have the 8th overall draft pick, but it's not like they have some budding superstar.
But to that point, they don't have enough invested in anybody else that they just can't go out and get a guy that might be better. And as an offensive coordinator, you can't lobby to go out and get a guy who might be better. Whereas, probably walking into the Steelers, you're going to either have to A, work with Kenny Pickett, B, work with Mason Rudolph, C, work with a guy who's not as good as either of them by the middle of next season, or you're working with a draft choice who I bet is not a first rounder, or at the very least, if he is a first rounder, is the fourth or fifth quarterback that's taken off the board this year. So, big scheme, big picture things. If I'm an offensive coordinator, plus you're working in a division that had every other team finish 500 or better versus going to work in the NFC South or the AFC South somewhere. I mean, that's tough sledding. And for a coach and in a division that tends to always gravitate back towards 17, 16 games, in a market that loves to blame the offensive coordinator for everything. Because they feel uncomfortable blaming the Pitt quarterback, and they feel uncomfortable blaming the coach that's never had a losing season for 17 years. So the offensive coordinator takes all the heat. It's a very unattractive job all around. And you might sprinkle in the fact that the Steelers don't exactly have a reputation for paying great for their assistant coaches. There's that too. Let's not forget that.
Gotta love the optimism, Tim. Appreciate it. But still, I want to ask a question about.
Well, if it is Arthur Smith,
this has, to me, the Steelers hiring Arthur Smith is just such a Steelers move, and maybe it's just me. It just screams. Guy was fired, not viewed well amongst league circles, can be grouchy. Gosh, this is just screaming. Steelers are going to bring this guy.
He's not going to give anything to the media. He's, not exactly the most sunshine and roses guy to talk to. He's going to want to run the ball. Hey, he worked with Derrick Henry. He can work with Najee Harris. Yep. The theory is now maybe that they pair him with a Jared Johnson, basically make him, or Gerard Johnson, make him the passing game coordinator. That they've kind of done that now. The last time through, they had co-offensive coordinators. This could be another iteration of that. Yeah. Passing game coordinators take running game coordinator, these subsects of what an offensive coordinator is that's more in vogue now. Okay, I guess I can see it, but I think to your point, and the point I was going to make, I'm not trying to be pessimistic on it. I'm painting a real picture of.
No, I totally get it.
Why they are where they are. I could blow sunshine and say that Kyle Shanahan's gonna, Clint Kubiak is gonna wait it out and be the guy. That's who I want. I mean, that's the guy who I would want, a young, innovative guy that can bring new thoughts, especially to the passing game, and a new way of looking at the running game. Even I don't have the belief that's going to happen. I feel like an Arthur Smith guy is very much more like what they're looking at.
Arthur Smith, they're going to sign Ryan Tannehill. It's going to be let's just duplicate 2019's Tennessee Titans offense minus Derrick Henry. We'll just have Najee Harris. Let's move on, though. Najee Harris is kind of someone I wanted to bring up here. For the first time, in my opinion, since the social media era really began, it felt like the locker room might have been lost at several different points throughout the season. At least it was being questioned. Let me put it that way. Mike Tomlin is, he's a player's coach. He does have a good finger on the pulse of what's going on. What is your take on just the overall culture of the Steelers? Because everyone says the Steelers way is just winning, and they're not winning, at least when it matters. So my question is, what is your take? You're in the locker room. You're talking to these players. You're talking to the coaches. What is your take on the culture that is the Pittsburgh Steelers heading into 2024?
And you're tying this back to what Najee said at the end of the season?
It's Najee Harris in a lot of ways. It's what he said about how they need to tighten things up. It's, refusing to talk to the media for the vast majority of the season at times. It's George Pickens and his issues. It's Deontay Johnson and his comments at time to time. And there are times where it feels like, are the inmates running an asylum? I hate using that analogy, but you understand what I'm saying. What's your take on that culture in the locker room?
Well, you kind of went out of your way to define the Steeler way, right? And what that is and how people perceive it versus what the reality is. So when I hear lose the locker room, that to me connotes dissent. And I would argue that this wasn't the first time since, would you say since 2019 is the first time in the social media era?
Yeah, I'm trying to think when that would have been.
See, I think it was chaos. It was chaos in 2017 and 18. It was something new every year. I mean, or every week, excuse me. You go back to that, what was it, the 2017 season with the anthem thing in Chicago starting in week 3, and then there was Bell's holdout, and then raiding his locker and stealing his shoes, and
I forgot about that.
all that's boiling over to Antonio Brown at the end of the year in 2018, and everything that AB would do in between, throwing Gatorade buckets in Baltimore and getting in Landry Jones's face in the sideline, all this stuff. Like, there was that all the time. So I feel like this has been a very roller coaster vibe to the locker room for many years now. But like, when I hear losing the locker room, that to me feels like dissent within the locker room, sex within the locker room. They're not unified behind the coach. The Steelers have always had this strange thing where they've remained unified behind Tomlin, but they just don't necessarily listen to the message. Like, I think what Najee Harris's point is that the message isn't getting there because it's not translating in practice habits, or it's not translating in terms of attention to detail once the game starts, or in between practice and when the game starts, so that they can perform well when the whistle is blown and the ball is kicked off. But it's not like, you can see all this stuff that's going on with how Le'Veon Bell is handling his holdout, or, the flags that Antonio Brown would draw for sliding down the goalpost, or him yapping on the sidelines when he wasn't getting the ball enough, according to him, or, how Pickens was not blocking, or all these other things that we have red flagged as problems with the Steelers in terms of their culture. It rarely blows back to any of them saying, we don't think Mike's in charge. We don't think Tomlin. They always sort of default away from blaming Tomlin for any of it. It's a weird thing in that when you have locker rooms that are like that, it usually comes down to at least part of the team saying the coach doesn't have this part of the locker room and here's why. Like, but nobody seems to ever want to put that at Tomlin's feet. It's strange. So yeah, I tend to agree that the locker room's messy. The locker room has been messy for years, but it doesn't seem to be because they're revolting against the coach. So, it's a weird thing, and people always kind of tie this into analysis of Tomlin. Like, this always comes back to, well, Mike Tomlin, he always gets the ship back to port. No, he does. He was also at the helm when it hit the iceberg and they were 2-6 last year, or when they lost for 3 weeks in a row to non-playoff teams and put themselves on the verge of playoff elimination. So when they get into these bad ruts, and they have one every year, what do they have? A losing streak of 3 games or more every year for the past 5 or 6, I think. Like, so if you go back to 2019, I think, or maybe even
sounds
2018,
about right. Yeah.
They've had a 3-game losing streak in each of those seasons that put them in a really bad spot when it's come to playoff situations. When things always get bumpy, we point to all this stuff like so-and-so is yapping about the quarterback. So-and-so is upset because they're not getting the ball enough. So-and-so is upset about playing time. James Harrison's falling asleep in a Barca-lounger. Melvin Ingram wants out and doesn't want to play anymore and has essentially quit on the team. Like, we always get these side stories, but you ask the players about it. Does Tomlin have control of the locker room? Even the offending people who are upset and complaining never say that Tomlin doesn't have control of the locker room. So I've never seen it. It's very unique to Pittsburgh.
That is such a weird dynamic. Like, when you lay it out the way you just did, and all this crap that's been happening in the locker room for all these years, and it's odd. Like, when you think about it, like, it really doesn't. Someone try to connect the dots, and it's almost impossible.
Well, even Najee. Like, look at Najee. You brought up him as sort of the launch point for this whole conversation. Najee was a guy who, when we asked him about finding the rudder of the team after their 3-game losing streak, he just barfed praise on Mike Tomlin about what a great job he did of keeping everybody on the same page. And, when things are bad, nobody gave up because Coach Tomlin was there. Like, he couldn't have given him enough credit. And then, they managed to make the playoffs. They hang with Buffalo for 3 quarters. And on locker cleanout day, he says, we got to tighten things up around here. Like, there's this cognitive dissonance, this intellectual inconsistency that always exists between what's wrong with the Steelers locker room vibe and it ever coming back to Tomlin. And I don't know, at some point or another, that needs to be reconciled. Either we need to reconcile it and say some of it's Tomlin's fault, or it's just not that big of a deal. And the issues are just more about them beating the Cardinals when they need to.
That would certainly absolve a lot of things if they would just not lose to 2-2-win teams in a 5-day span. Think about that. I mean, if they win one of those 2 games, it's a completely different narrative, and they're in a different position heading into the stretch. But let's talk about Tomlin. The extension's coming. You agree?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
You think it's just your stock 2-year extension, or do you think there's going
Yeah.
to be more to it?
It's a good question. I don't think it needs to be. I think they've proven it doesn't need to be. I mean, they even took it 1 year deeper than they normally did already. So I don't think it needs to be. I mean, the extension talk to me, it's Art Rooney's money.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's just, you can fire a coach at any time. There's no repercussions. It's just you paying them a little bit more to do it. So I never get bent out of shape about a coach extension. It's a paper move. So the only thing it does do is it probably gives an offensive coordinator, for them, it gives them a little bit more security in their realm for whatever they sign on for, feeling like a coach just isn't going to get up and go. Like if Tomlin took it to the point of it was 1 year and done, I'm sure that would send out signals of concern for anybody who would take that job. Like, oh, that's different. They've never done that in Pittsburgh before. So even if I do an okay job and he leaves, a new guy might come in and blow me out. Like, I think putting an extension on paper is as much for operational flow when it comes to coaching staff, consistency and coaching staff building or rebuilding in this case. That's the biggest angle. That's the biggest reason to give him an extension.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about, we started this whole conversation about reacting to adversity. I would say there was a lot of that in 2023 in offseason. Omar Khan's got a full calendar year under his belt. Andy Weidl's there, obviously. We know Art Rooney's involved, so is Mike Tomlin. What do you think the reaction will be for the Steelers entering 2024 based on what they saw in 2023? I'll give you an example. I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that center will be addressed because Mason Cole did not play well this year. I know he has 1 year left on his contract, but nonetheless, it just seems like they're going to probably identify that as a position that needs a huge upgrade. Outside of the coaching staff, we're talking about the roster. Where do you see them having some, okay, we need to address this? What are some of your priorities heading into this offseason?
Yeah. Well, let's stay on the offensive side of the ball since we started there. I don't think they view tackle as much of a concern as a lot of other people do.
Like, they love Dan Moore. They love Dan Moore.
They do love Dan Moore, and I think they don't feel the need to put Broderick Jones over on the left side like a lot of people do. I wrote about it at TribLive. Broderick Jones said that going to the left side is still his preferred spot. He still thinks he's capable of being better at left than he is at right, but he didn't blow any smoke about it. He wasn't fanning any flames. He said, if they want me at right, I'll stay at right. Like he said the right thing that a rookie would say, ostensibly.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of other people disagree with that and say put the rookie first-round draft choice at his position of choice and then just find the right tackle. And Tomlin's on record as saying that Moore is a lot better at left than he is at right. I don't know why. But, one thing they could do is if they think Moore can handle guard, they can move one of the guards to center. They can move Ciamalo, more likely Daniels, to center, and then find another guard and put Jones at left and find themselves – I guess they don't have to find another guard. They could put Moore at guard and then find themselves a different right tackle. They could do that.
Yeah.
But I don't think they feel that that's that big of a deal. They should feel, and I think they do, that they need another wide receiver.
Yeah.
I think not only for this year, but next. So I think they will address wide receiver somewhere early in the draft or free agency. More likely the draft. And I think they know the quarterback is going to be a need. Just to what end, I don't know. Like we've talked about some of the permutations already. On the defensive side of the ball, for sure, based on what Tomlin said at his season-ending press conference, he was pretty transparent about the injury concerns for Holcomb and Quan Alexander. I'm very much in lockstep with the way he described the inside linebacker situation, which was they felt pretty good about the production they were getting when they had all three on the field at the same time. But that quickly stopped being the case. And the guys who were injured have a reputation for being injured. That's a component of why they were on the open market to begin with, why they were free agents to begin with. Right. And the Steelers took a chance on those guys. And it certainly sounds like Cole Holcomb still has a ways to go health-wise to get back to where he was. So I think inside linebacker is again a priority. I think defensive line is a priority because they know Cam Hayward's getting along in years and maybe the Ogunjobi contract isn't the greatest. Benton is developing, but you need more. You need more people. Yeah. You need more bodies. And I would also think that they could do well by themselves to get themselves another safety and another corner.
It's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff, which is another reason why I don't think that they draft. Like, I'm moving away from the first or second round quarterback. Like, if you get a first round quarterback, it's to replace Kenny Pickett,
Right.
which I don't think they're going to do. Second round quarterback, okay, maybe if some of those guys slide and you're tempted, I could see it. But like we said, my guess is they'll address offensive line moderately in free agency like they've done in the past with Daniels and Ciamalu and Cole. Like, they'll get a guy like that.
Yeah.
Probably maybe directly a center, or like we said, somebody who can move one of the other guards to center through whatever permutation they decide to take. They'll go middle of the road and get themselves inside linebacker numbers like they did last year, maybe just different bodies. I don't know what they think about Pat Pete at safety. I hope they think that they can find themselves another corner. But those, I think, are the biggest needs. It's just what my guess is that they would go inside linebacker, offensive line, more so in free agency, and then go draft worthy at safety, corner, and wide receiver.
Shoot, if I were the Steelers, I'd pay cheap money to get Terrell Edmunds back and get Minkah Fitzpatrick playing where he used to play and not in the box, because that has not been successful for the Steelers. And if you want your all-pro to be an all-pro, let him do what he does best. He had an injury-plagued season. I get all that. But I think what we see here is when you go over these team need lists, which I've created myself, everyone has, that's long. That's a lengthy list. People that think this team is one player away, I can't get on board with that. I don't care if you get Kirk Cousins or if you get the next iteration of Ben Roethlisberger, young Ben Roethlisberger in the room. I don't think that's going to really move the needle to a championship caliber team right away. There's a lot that they have to do here, and I'm not sure if one offseason is going to be enough. So let me finish this up with a tough question for you, Tim. You cover, and this is for the Pittsburgh sports fans out there. Which Pittsburgh sports team do you think wins a championship next?
Oh, God, that's a tough question because I feel like they're all pretty far away. It's not going to be the Pirates because they're the Pirates. Right. I take it that we're not going too far abroad with college sports here.
No, we're sticking to the pros here. We're
three pro sports teams. If you can find a quarterback, it's easiest to win in football between football and hockey, I think. You got to find a real dynamic superstar for it to be just one guy. Like, even the Penguins didn't find one dynamic superstar. They found two.
Yeah.
And even when they won cups in the 90s, they had two. They had Yager and Lemieux, plus some other great Hall of Famers around them. But I feel like, especially as we've looked at what Mahomes has continued to do with the Chiefs as that roster has gotten thinner, what Allen has been able to do as that roster on offense has either been injury-addled or gotten thinner. Because the game has moved so much towards the quarterback, if you can get a quarterback first, you've got the best chance. It's the most singularly reliant sport. For as much as it's the ultimate team sport because there's 11 guys in the field at the same time, the other 20 rely on that. The other 21 rely on that one a ton.
Yeah.
So it's just easier to win if you get the quarterback. You just got to get the quarterback. So,
like, Steelers?
I'll go with the Steelers probably. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that says a lot about the Penguins,
they're also, I guess so, but they've also made the playoffs.
They
just made the playoffs, and the Penguins just didn't. And right now, it's not looking like they are. Now they could, and they probably still have the best roster of the three teams. I think that, the Penguins are probably close-est right now, but they're just not playing like it. And
playing like crap.
And they're going in the wrong direction. They're going to probably lose Jake Gensel, who's their second best player, either via free agency or trade. And then where do you go from there as the guys that you have invested in are now depreciating assets? They're all depreciating assets except for Crosby, who continues to play at a remarkable level even with his age. But
he's insane. That pass against the Canadians was out of this
crazy.
world.
But he can't bring the other 19 guys per night along on his back the same way one quarterback can bring along the other 21.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I've always called the quarterback position the most important position in professional sports. And yes, one player can transcend and elevate everyone else, but it's going to be difficult. We'll see. Tim, I do thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Why don't you go ahead and plug your social media and as well as what's coming up with your TribLive stuff?
Yeah, at Tim Benz PGH, you can find me on X there, and you can find our Breakfast with Benz podcasts at the Fans First Network and daily on the Breakfast with Benz page at TribLive. They'll be refreshed every day. We put something up new Monday through Friday a couple times per week. We might have 4 on one day and 2 on the other and 1 on one day, but we generally get up 6 or 7 different podcasts per week with various guests on various topics. And you can read me daily at TribLive. And you can check out the Madden Benz Unfiltered podcast with Mark Madden. It's a live stream, actually, 9:30 a.m. on Mondays on the TribLive Facebook stream.
Always fun, Tim. Thank you for your time.
And Robert Morris hockey and Duquesne basketball, too. If you're a fan of Robert Morris hockey or Duquesne basketball, I'll be in the call a lot of those games. I'm looking at the calendar right now. I've got one hockey game coming up against Mercyhurst for Robert Morris and a game against Duquesne coming up this week. So check those out as well.
Absolutely. Tim, thanks for your time. I do appreciate it. We'll talk again soon. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.